these great live streams. With us today, we have Tyler from Food and Water Watch and the lovely Maria from SRAP and Shen. So why don't we do a little introduction? Maria, why don't you kick us off with the intro here? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organizations.
Okay, so I am a regional representative of Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, which is actually a national nonprofit. I work most of the Chesapeake Bay watershed states, and we work to empower communities to educate and to advocate for a more sustainable food system. We talk a lot about the impacts of communities by the industrialized system and work to build a system that's ecologically sound, that is equitable, and that is economically viable for our family farms. I'm also a member of Sussex Health and Environmental Network. And that basically came out of a lot of citizens groups throughout Sussex County who were fighting the same kind of impacts, but in different communities. Because as you know, Sussex County is one of the top counties with industrialized broiler production here. We have a lot of operations, processing plants, and a lot of problems that are associated with it, especially when we're talking about water quality, air pollution, and also vulnerable communities that are overburdened already with a lot of pollution.
Wonderful. Tyler, could you give us a little background about you and Food and Water Watch?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Dustin. So my name is Tyler Lobdell. I'm a staff attorney with Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action. We're a nationwide environmental and public health and food safety nonprofit. And sort of our general philosophy is we work to build power among regular people so that we can put our democracy to work and hold some of the most powerful corporate interests accountable so that we can protect our environment, our communities, and our future. And my work specifically is focused on using legal advocacy to fight the harms, community harms, environmental harms associated with the factory farm production model. And so part of that work has been researching the adoption of what we're going to talk about today, anaerobic digesters by the factory farm industry, and helping to educate the public about why we believe they're a false solution to the myriad harms that folks struggle with when confronted with this industry.
Great. Thank you both for being here, and we've had a number of other people join us. So again, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook. And we're going to go ahead and dive in here. I think maybe some of the greatest conversations we have start by defining the issue that we're talking about. And so right now, here tonight, we're here to talk about some of the health and environmental issues that are already an issue in Sussex County, and about the possible anaerobic digestion facility that could be coming into that area. So with that in mind, Maria, if you could tell us a little bit more about what some of those issues that Sussex is already struggling with. And then Tyler, maybe you could then kind of go through what exactly an anaerobic digester like this is. So Maria, why don't we go with you first?
Okay, so as probably many are aware, we have been severely struggling down here with water quality. In Sussex County, we have, as I mentioned, a lot of industrial agricultural production happening within this one county. It is very concentrated. 90% of our waterways are polluted here. The headlines have just been full for the past couple of years about communities who are dealing with private well contamination. And what we were talking about prior to going live here is that many of these communities are out in rural areas. They are vulnerable communities and they do not have access to public water. So they rely on their well water. Part of the issues here when we talk about water quality, we are a coastal region. Some of the wells here are very shallow. We have a very high water table. And when you're doing things that pertain to, for example, like spray fields and things like that, which is the big issue around where we had a lot of the water pollution and contamination near like the Mount Air facility, near facilities in Milton. It is the perfect storm for contamination. It's very prone to it because we have very sandy soils. So, you know, when you pour something into sand, it goes basically straight through. So that makes our geology one that's very prone to contamination. When we're talking about projects like this one, we're talking again about a rural area. We are talking, this proposal is for a location in Seaford, which was the previous, it's the site of a former Purdue composting operation. They had had secretary's orders, and I think they had stopped production there after they had got some secretary's orders for some violations. I will say there is a site that you can go on called EWG, and you can basically type in your location there, and it'll bring up water quality. And I noticed that the groundwater there in Seaford, when you put in the location, there are 10 right now, 10 contaminants that exceed the EWG environmental health guidelines. All 10 of them, the potential effects are cancer. What do we know here about the cancer rates here in Delaware? Unfortunately, we're at the race to the top with that when it comes to other states. So it's very serious, and the effects of something like this spread out to the entire area here. Even if you don't live in that area, water flows, right? So if it's in your well today, it's going somewhere else tomorrow. Also, you have to consider the impacts that this has on, we have one of our main economic producers here is tourism. When our water quality, we have the fish kills, we have problems with dissolved oxygen, bacteria, beaches are closing. This is harming, a lot of the income coming into our state. So we're all connected, the environment's all connected. And along with that, you're gonna have, and we have this problem too around near these facilities, is the air pollution. You have emissions. So that's just, one of the things that I'll start with.
Tyler, could you just kind of give us a rundown on what exactly a digester like this is?
Sure. So I'll simplify it a little bit, and I'd like to first give sort of a description of what an anaerobic digester facility is in a nutshell, and then talk about this one in particular. And so please do drop questions in the chat if anything I say isn't crystal clear. So anaerobic digesters have been around for quite a while in one form or another. And what we're now seeing is sort of what I would call second generation digester technology in terms of its relationship to managing or taking in waste from industrial animal agriculture or factory farms. And so the way a digester works is it's an above ground concrete containment facility where you put in or you feed a waste stream, or in industry parlance, it's a feedstock. And so that feedstock is put into the digester. And then certain conditions must be maintained in that enclosure, which enable microorganisms to break down certain parts of that organic matter. And the byproduct of that microorganism eating essentially is the release of gases. And so it's called biogas at that stage. And it's about 60% methane, around 35% carbon dioxide, and then some trace gases and water vapor. And so the digester traps that biogas which can then be delivered for further processing or for end use there on site, combustion in a generator or whatever its end use is going to be intended for. And so this particular facility is a large scale industrial gas production site. So they're proposing to build 4 large digesters and a variety of appurtenances, a variety of control technologies, including gas flares, just like you would see at a fracking well, for example, pre and post treatment of the gas once it's collected. Now, I think one thing that is often left out when the industry talks about this technology is what's left over afterwards. I think it's really easy to hear developers of factory farm biogas digesters and think that the situation you have is you start with the waste stream, be that cow manure or pig manure, or in this case, waste from the poultry industry. So from hatcheries, from Purdue's processing plants, and poultry litter from the poultry houses. And it goes into the digester, and out the other end comes flowers and organic soil and renewable natural gas. And that's a myth I really think is important for folks to recognize. The waste that goes in still must be managed and ultimately disposed of after it comes out. So the gas collection process does not eliminate the waste fed into the digester. Okay, so that's a critical point. And in this particular facility, what we are dealing with, and I should say that historically digesters have used cow manure and pig manure as feedstock. To use poultry litter in particular is relatively novel. The most recent federal statistics I've looked at, there's only 2 operational digesters in the United States that use poultry waste as its feedstock. And one of the reasons for that is because poultry litter is not conducive to digestion in its raw form. It's very dry. And so enormous amounts of water, fresh water, have to be added to the litter to bring it up to about 95% moisture before it's even suitable for introduction into a digester. Additionally, chicken manure is particularly high in ammonia. And ammonia at certain levels is fatal to those microorganisms essential for digesters to do their thing, for these facilities to operate. And so just from a technical standpoint, taking in feedstock from the poultry industry presents particular challenges and is a relatively novel use of this technology.
So what is the kind of the difference between those small farm digesters that maybe some people think about and what we're talking about here? I mean, are there differences in terms of scale, in terms of output, in terms of how the biogas is being used, all that sort of stuff?
Absolutely, Dustin. So like I said at the onset, this is a large industrial facility that is not linked to any particular farming operation. And so the idea here is that this facility would receive waste from Purdue's network of contract poultry farms, as well as its processing facilities and hatcheries. And so, back in the 70s, right, you might see a small digester on a dairy farm that the farmer was using to collect a small amount of gas to run an on-site generator, for example. This is a much different proposal than that is. Those facilities present challenges of their own, but this is, like I said, sort of next generation. And one of the major differences is that this is ultimately designed to produce a refined version of biogas. And so in addition to the digesters that we've discussed, there will be a processing facility, there would be a processing facility on site that quote unquote upgrades the biogas into what's called biomethane. So it removes that CO2, it removes hydrogen sulfide and the other contaminants so that at the end of the day, you end up with 98, 99% methane, which can then be injected into natural gas pipeline infrastructure and combusted by end users in the same way that fossil natural gas is used. And so it becomes essentially indistinguishable from, for example, fracked gas, and is utilized in the same way in the energy grid.
And what happens to the, I want to get a little bit into the weeds here. And again, if you have questions, please do so. And Maria, feel free to chime in anytime too. What happens to the other parts of the gas that are refined out?
Yeah, so the CO2 can be captured and then sold for other industrial purposes. Ultimately, for example, hydrogen sulfide might need yet another process, a scrubbing facility to deal with that. And so for the purposes of this facility, those are essentially waste products that have to be dealt with. There's not really economically feasible uses for those. And so really the purpose is to end up with that highly concentrated methane gas that can then be sold to Chesapeake utilities. And those other gases just have to be managed and dealt with. That's how I would describe it.
Great. So we were almost kind of expecting that a hearing at the Planning and Zoning in Sussex County would have taken place by now, but it hasn't as of yet. But that aside, could you kind of give us an overview of the process for whether or not this project gets approved, kind of on the government level?
You want to start and then I'll chime in. Go ahead, Tyler.
Great, Maria. Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to back up a step, Dustin, because initially what raised a lot of red flags for Food and Water Watch and for Maria's organizations, Shen and SRAP, was the sort of secretive, unlawful process by which they were trying to push this project through. So last year, this site would be located in an area that's zoned ag residential. In other words, the only uses that are per se acceptable in this area is agriculture and single family homes. Other uses have to be approved as a conditional use or a variance, or they have to go through a local zoning decision process. And when this was first put up to the Sussex County Planning and Zoning Commission, it was presented as though the construction and operation of an industrial gas production facility was no different than the pre-existing open air composting operation, which just on its face is quite frankly ridiculous. And by talking about it in that way, they were able to present the issue with no public input, with no public hearings, and with essentially almost no oversight. In other words, the county council, your elected officials there in Sussex, wouldn't even have to weigh in on the decision. And so that raised red flags for us. Why would this project, which the developer is presenting as good for the community, why would they want to skirt the opportunity to engage with local places? So I think that background is important. Thankfully, the Planning and Zoning Commission has pulled back on that and removed that track from their agenda. And the developer has now submitted an actual application to amend the conditional uses that applied to the pre-existing composting site. And so now there will be public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then the Planning and Zoning Commission will send their recommendation for the project to the Sussex County Council, which will make a final decision on whether or not to amend Sussex County Code to allow this new use. Now, there are ongoing problems with that process, but at a minimum, the public will now have an opportunity to engage with this and let their voices be heard to your local decision makers.
Yeah, and I wanted to add something. So when we're talking, because this really got me, there was a condition on that conditional use that they were trying to pass it on that said any alteration of the site would require a public process. Now, when we're talking about this issue, and Tyler mentioned that it would handle some of produced waste, not only produced, other integrators as well. And we have to understand this is from the tri-state region. So this is not just for Delaware waste, okay? We're talking about the poultry industry waste from the entire, and anyone who's driven through the tri-state region here knows that's an awful lot of waste that they want to bring into Delaware, which is going to, in the end, have an end product that needs to be land applied, right? Delaware does not have a good history of being able to manage the waste, our own waste from our state, let alone to bring multiple states' waste here into Sussex County. And the area where it's being brought is a vulnerable community. I was looking at the stats of it, and I actually took a drive out last weekend, to, get on the ground and actually see who lives near there, how close are they? And you have a lot of minority communities. You have a lot of, I think within a half mile, there was a mobile home community. Within a mile, there was another. It's about 2 miles below, if everybody remembers, when the National Guard was in here with the Superfund site, now the new Superfund site in Blades, it's about 2 miles below that. So we already have a lot of industrial pollution and problems there already. This is, like I said, a community, it's a vulnerable community. Community that does not have a big political voice, which in my opinion is probably why one of the reasons years ago that the site was selected, because it wouldn't get an opposition from that. But this is a highly industrialized operation. This is not composting. The other thing I want to bring about for anyone who lives here, we all know this, for anyone who doesn't, we have huge traffic problems down here in Sussex County. And when we were talking about, it's a tourist region with the beaches down here. You get into summertime, you can't move on these roads. You cannot move. Now we're talking about tri-state truck traffic coming in to the region 24/7, because this has to be fed consistently. You're talking about major truck traffic. One of the things that was interesting to me in the process as they started trying to get it through the P&Z without public input was that they waived the traffic impact study. So this is something that we really need to pay attention to when it comes in front of the conditional use for Sussex County, because not only is it traffic, but you're talking about emissions to the area as well. When you're talking about all the trucks coming into one location, it's a lot of trucks. So one of the things that the industry will tell you is, jobs. When you're talking about a facility, it's an anaerobic digester. There's very little jobs associated with it, except for some temporary construction jobs that will not remain. That'll go away after it's built. So I think there's a lot of things to think about. I think there's a lot of positive spin going off. One of the things that I've heard is, now land application is causing all this pollution, so now we're going to create renewable energy. But nobody's talking about there's an end product at the end. So now multi-state waste is coming in with an end product that, by the way, and Tyler can probably address this a little bit more than I can, is more water soluble, which means, guess what? It runs off easier. And Tyler,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
you might want to add.
We've actually had a number of questions, Marie, but you raised a really good point. I was looking at an article today from Delaware Public Media, which I hopefully graciously left a comment on that talked about this is the solution to the problem, right? As you were just saying, we have a problem with nitrogen pollution in Delaware. We have a problem with our chicken waste issue in Delaware and how we deal with that. Right now, we deal with that mainly by way of composting, and the water sits in lagoons and then it's sprayed on fields. And they presented it as if this was going to be the solution. I think it's really important, and this is what I commented on. If we were talking about just Delaware waste, right? If we were talking about a small anaerobic digester that's handling just our waste in Delaware, and that we had a wastewater treatment facility hooked up to, right? And it could handle the affluent, the water, and the dry waste was then, the nitrogen bonds, and we can compost even further. That would be a different conversation. Then maybe you could make that argument, maybe. But what you're actually talking about here is that you have a very large facility that's taking in all of this waste that then has to what we know is not hooked up to a wastewater treatment facility, and you're having to still spray the water. So yes, okay, so if it was just Delaware, right, then you will have a net benefit. But because you're adding all the waste from outside of the state, and then any benefit you had has been zeroed out and then added to as a problem, and exponentially increasing the amount of wastewater that we have to spray, as you just said, is actually more soluble. But we've had a number of questions I want to get to before we get too backlogged. Tyler, maybe you can just touch on this one real quick. Caitlin from Facebook is asking, what normally happens to poultry litter if it isn't processed in a digester?
Yeah, so these are great questions, and they're all sort of dovetailing together. So usually poultry waste is land applied. And I think this segues nicely with what you were, or importantly, with what you were just saying, Dustin. Not only does this facility bring in poultry waste region-wide, because we're talking about running it through a digester, you will start with a certain quantity of poultry litter, which then has to be turned into a slurry. So you're making the ultimate waste product much larger by bringing a digester into the mix, because what happens is, like I said, after the gas is collected, then the digestate, that pollution-laden waste stream that's left over, is typically separated into solid digestate and liquid digestate. And as Maria noted, that liquid digestate typically is land applied. And this is one point that the developer here has not been transparent about. There's been some references to processing or pre-treating, and that pre-treatment can mean a lot of different things. That wastewater on site, but at least as of last month, DNREC had not received the required permit applications for that facility to be involved. And so it's unclear how they plan on dealing with the large amount of liquid wastewater that will be generated by having to run the poultry litter through the digesters.
Yeah, and if I could add there, so part of what I saw coming out in various articles and various different things with the facility is that some of the end product is going to go into compost, which compost has to be land applied. The problem with the secretary's order with the facility, the original facility, which was the compost before that, the Purdue that they were trying to get in under the conditional use, they had received secretary's orders because of problems that they were distributing or selling compost that was over the limits on chromium and bacteria. So to say that, this is great, because it's not necessarily the case.
The only other thing I'll add there, because I think this is really important, you're right, Maria. The plan here, the proposal is to take that solid digestate, that solid waste stream, and put that into the existing composting site. The composting site was economically a complete failure when it was being operated by Purdue. They sunk many tens of millions of dollars into that site, and there were never customers enough to take the compost, and they never really had a process in place to end up with a usable, safe product. And so not only is that reality there in the background, this new owner, this new developer, has actually amended the composting permit to expand the total amount of compost output that they plan to have. So I'm not sure what the rationale is when the pre-existing amount of compost that was being produced didn't have a customer base, what the idea is behind saying they're going to have more compost coming out of the site. So I think that's a critical point.
And I'll add to this here too, Tyler, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but for those in Sussex County, I think probably everybody's pretty aware of it because it was pretty public. There is a composting facility that was running near Prime Hook there, that the Blessings facility. And that for years was under Secretary's order. As a matter of fact, it was running for years without any Sussex County conditional use while it was in Secretary's orders. And the neighbors for years got together and finally got it into conditional use hearing. There were conditions put on it. There was waste that sat there in basically 30 to 40 foot piles that was so hot it couldn't be taken anywhere. The conditional use, the neighbors ended up, because they could not apply by the conditions on it, getting it pulled. And then there was some litigation about some type of FOIA thing, and it ended up, but this has been a problem for over a decade for the neighbors there. Totally not being controlled in any way, shape, or form by the county or by the state regulatory agency.
So we have a few more questions to get through. So Shelley, who's here on Zoom with us, is asking a pretty technical question. Maybe Tyler, you'd be able to answer this. If the ammonia in the chicken litter kills the anaerobic bacteria needed to make the biogas, what else is added to the litter and freshwater mixture to get it to produce the biogas? Does that process or does this project that we know of include adding any human waste or the chicken OF or possibly OFFAL, the chicken remnants that's not able to be consumed by humans or animals, to the mix to help facilitate that?
So as we were talking about the need to turn the poultry litter into a slurry, another sort of reason for doing that is it's an opportunity to lower those ammonia levels. But there are other feedstocks that are being proposed here that can be used to regulate that ammonia and pH levels in the digester. So like I said, the waste stream out of Purdue's processing plant is being contemplated here, as well as hatchery waste. And this same operator operates so digesters can be fed by a variety of feedstocks. Other digesters are fed by just food waste that isn't consumed by humans and goes bad. And so, hypothetically, they could add food waste if that was needed to regulate ammonia levels. This kind of all goes to, like, you have to put more and more into these things to end up with a viable process, which means you have more and more polluted waste coming out of these things that has to be managed and ultimately disposed of.
We had a question from Patty on Facebook. Is this the same, and I'm not sure the facility, maybe Marie, you know, is this the same type of facility approved just south of Georgetown on Route 113?
Yes, so I know what she's talking about. Yes, they do have an approval. As a matter of fact, that was a big issue too for the local people. They'll remember probably reading it about that. It was, I think, the Clean Bay project. They had originally put an application in, and I think it was pretty close near the private school and some recreational fields, a new facility, and they had a lot of pushback on it. And I believe the neighbors had even hired attorneys, if I'm not mistaken, and that application ended up getting withdrawn by the company. Then they came back into an area that was had a little less pushback, and it was approved there, even though the neighbors came out in opposition to it there. And that really, I haven't heard much more of that in Delaware, although I know they did get an approval in Westover, Maryland, that the neighbors there are also
fighting. I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer this quite yet, but Shelley is asking, here on Zoom, who are the clients for the refined biomethane, and how many miles of pipe will need to be laid? And I'll expand that out a little bit for you, Tyler. What is the other infrastructure that will need to be created to deal with this facility and its processes?
Yeah, so according to public statements by the developer here, they are in partnership with Chesapeake Utilities, and Chesapeake Utilities will purchase the biomethane at the end of the process. And this really gets into why this is a marriage of two really harmful industries. Because in terms of the question about infrastructure, there's some ambiguity on this point on exactly how the biomethane will end up in the regional natural gas pipeline grid. The latest word from the developer is that they're going to use trucks to transport the biomethane away, which are sometimes called truck bombs, because this is explosive, dangerous gas. And so, I see that there were some questions about traffic and what have you. To put a number to that, in the developer's own paperwork, they're proposing 86 trucks in and out of the facility a day, Monday through Saturday. I think it could very well be more than that. And some of those trucks are going to be truck bombs filled with biomethane. Now, there's also been discussion of installing new natural gas pipeline infrastructure so that the biomethane could be injected into the regional grid on site. If they do that, now you're talking about utility infrastructure, which you as customers of Chesapeake Utility pay for. Your rates increase to pay for new pipeline infrastructure. And then there's an expectation that that infrastructure will be used for 15 or 20 years. And so why I say this relates to two harmful industries is because there's no discussion of the biomethane that would be produced by this facility replacing fossil natural gas. What this would do is prop up and entrench existing fossil natural gas infrastructure, including fracked gas and all of the climate impacts that come along with that. And so this is being used to greenwash not only the factory farm poultry industry, but the fossil natural gas industry as well.
So as far as we know, there's not a plan to convert or put a biogas powered energy generating facility on the site. Is that correct?
That's correct. They will have natural gas generators and heating units on site, which I haven't seen any indication that they intend on using their biomethane product to operate. My guess is they will pay for fossil natural gas to run those because it's a lot cheaper than biomethane. And then they will sell the biomethane. Yep. And I should say, even if they don't install pipelines at the end of the day, it's likely that there will need to be injection infrastructure built somewhere else, again, which you as ratepayers of Chesapeake Utility would ultimately pay for.
And if I can add this, in thinking, and we're talking about the waste streams, we have the problem of, and this is not, Delaware seems to be very business friendly. And we've already had communities that have just fought against, and I think the permit was approved, bringing in waste from the largest wastewater treatment facility in Chicago. Okay, so imagine the industrial operations and that are out there, bringing that waste into Delaware, right? Which we have problems managing our own. Why? I think we, beyond this, application that we're talking about now, I think we need to talk about why is our state, being used for like a dumping ground for all the other states' industry, because we don't seem to be able to manage our own. So that's a larger discussion, but just something that came to mind when, Tyler was talking.
So Shelley in the comments here on Zoom states, it seems this project will release gases into the atmosphere that increase global warming, assuming she's talking about the methane. Is this project in conflict with Delaware's commitment to lessen our carbon and other atmospheric pollutants? Do we know what DENREC's position is on this, the pollution associated with this project? And I just want to, just to, not to play devil's advocate in this case, but just to state the waste itself, right? If it's just out there, or even if it's composting to an extent, is releasing this gas. And again, this is kind of what, there are some environmental advocates that are favorable to some of these smaller projects on singular farms, particularly in the dairy industry, that use the waste that's on the farms to digest and capture the gas, because it actually is lower emissions in terms of atmospheric emissions and impact to capture it and to burn it than it is to let the methane from the dairy farm to escape into the atmosphere. Again, you're talking about a much smaller project with a different type of litter, but essentially that argument has transitioned across to be applied to all biogas. I think, again, important in the context of this conversation, talking about a massive facility, not treating the waste of a singular farm or even a couple farms in Delaware. This is a completely different conversation. But just to say, the argument has been stated, it's better to capture it and burn it than to let it dissipate. So go ahead, but carry on with the question.
I can weigh in on that a little bit. They did some pilot projects in Maryland with that, with the smaller ones, and they were not economically feasible in the end.
That has been the case in many in Europe as well. Whether or not you're looking at the emissions aspect of things, the economics of it has very rarely ever came out on the positive end of things. And that happens as well in the pyrolysis industry. The economics just kill it.
And, to Dustin, what you were saying, the reason why these waste streams release methane when not put through a digester is because of the factory farm production model, where you have way too many animals held in confinement. Their waste is then collected and often, like especially with pig and cow factory farms, is then liquefied. And so I just want to make it clear that we have what I think of as sort of an original sin problem here. The reason why there's methane that supposedly needs to be captured is because of deliberate decision to adopt a production model that irresponsibly manages its waste. Pastured animals, their waste breaks down aerobically, in other words, with oxygen, which does not generate methane emissions. And so this is a problem created by the industry that could be solved by the industry by transitioning to actual sustainable production models, as opposed to assuming that we, for all of time, will have factory farms bigger and bigger and more harmful. So let's find Band-Aids to deal with the byproduct of that.
Great point.
And this brings up another thing. So when we're talking about renewable energy, even though, they're calling this renewable energy, is it sustainable, right? We have wind, we have solar, which are renewable energy. That's a sustainable energy. There's something called the renewable portfolio standards. New York does not have this with the animal waste in their portfolio. So that's an interesting point when we talk about renewable energy. Is this something that should be classified into that category? It's not sustainable, even though they're, it's renewable.
And, to get to the greenhouse gas emission question more pointedly, a report just came out recently, and I apologize, I'm escaping my mind who put it out, but essentially found that methane as an energy source has not resulted in the greenhouse gas emission reductions that were hoped for as we transitioned away from coal, precisely because of the inefficiencies in methane distribution. So leakage from pipelines, leakage at the end user stage. So just because methane has been captured by a digester does not mean that it will not ultimately be released into the atmosphere. A significant portion of that will end up still going into the atmosphere. And as I'm sure many of you know, it's many times more harmful to the climate than carbon dioxide. And in addition to the greenhouse gas issues, the local air quality impacts are undeniable. So one of the things that this facility will have to get from DNREC, the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, is an air permit allowing it to emit very harmful volatile organic compounds, like all sorts of different local air contaminants, which goes back to my point about this being a large-scale industrial gas production facility with flares and all the rest. So you have dubious greenhouse gas reduction claims and certain local air quality impacts associated with this project,
as well as the environmental justice impacts there when we're talking about community there that is already overburdened with air and water pollution. You know, I mean, I think one of the things that has really been brought to the forefront is systemic racism. Environmental justice is environmental racism. There's a reason that industry picks certain communities, you know, to put projects in, and that's because they don't have the ability to fight back.
We've had two similar questions. I'm going to lump them together here. We just had one from Willie, and we had one earlier from Shelley here on Zoom about kind of comparing this to sort of having like an oil refinery near a residential area, insofar as we're talking about combustible products. So the questions were, are there any other byproducts that are flammable or have combustible properties? And what is the risk for the facility in terms of possible fires or unplanned combustions, let's say?
Maria, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, I think that, Tyler, you probably have more of the science on that with the combustion, but.
Yeah, so it's absolutely a risk. There have been other digester facilities in the United States that have had explosions. And one of the so, you know, your analogy to an oil refinery in your backyard is spot on. This is a gas refinery, period. That's what this is. Let's not mince words about that. And the gases being handled are explosive and dangerous and under pressure, right? Like, this is an industrial facility with public health and public safety challenges associated with it, in addition to the trucking of methane. In other parts of the country, what we have seen is these facilities are not designed in a way like you would expect with an oil refinery that even allows appropriate inspection and oversight from your local fire marshal. And so, you know, this would be the first project of its kind in Delaware. And if there were to be a problem at this facility, your local fire department would be hard pressed to deal with it appropriately because of the significant challenges in how these facilities are built, right? There isn't access inside of the digester. And so when things go wrong, it can go very wrong, both in terms of explosions as well as spills. If there was a facility in Oregon not too long ago where one of these above ground digesters failed and spilled tens of thousands of gallons of pollution laden waste into the local bay. And it was a significant environmental catastrophe.
And I'm going to add to that, Tyler, if you don't mind, that again, to remind people, this site is not in an industrial zone. This is an ag residential zone, which is why, you know, it has to go for a conditional use, because it is not zoned to put some type of industrial. So when we're talking about safety, you know, there's a reason for zoning. Zoning is supposed to provide for the harmonious, right, development, to put things where they make sense. This is not an ag, you know, operation. This is an industrial operation.
Very good point. And so this will all, you know, we have to go through the county process, right, before DNREC will touch this thing. But then we also have an opportunity as it goes through the DNREC processes as well. I feel like it's really important for everybody to really, you know, no matter what your stance is on the idea of whether or not biogas should be created or not. I think it's important that we all follow this project as it's processed through and make sure that it has the transparency and accountability for the community in which it's being placed, as Maria said, is nearby residential and sensitive lands as well. Of course, as Maria started in the beginning of this, we have high water tables in this area, have very high risk for something to go wrong, in which case you're polluting already overburdened waterways as well. So I think on a number of levels, it's important that we all stay involved as we go through these processes to make sure these questions are answered. And if they can't be answered, that this project does not move forward until they can be answered, until everything is done in the way it's supposed to be done. And I know that's when Sierra Club first got involved in this project. It was not being done as it was supposed to be done. There was no transparency. There was no public input process, no voice whatsoever for the community as it made its way through the county council. It's just unacceptable, regardless of what your stance is. That's unacceptable. And so, Maria, I want to give you an opportunity if you've heard anything else from the community on concerns around this before we move into to start wrapping up.
So the major concerns that we've heard, or that I've heard, let me put it this way, the major concerns that I've heard is, why are we bringing waste from multiple states into here? That, again, the truck traffic, I've heard, I can't tell you how many times, the amount of pollution and emissions you're bringing into an area that already has problems with the water, with the air. That has to be taken into account when we see what, all of this is costing us from poor environmental decisions and regulations. Look at what the clean water to restore it. Look what that's costing, right? We need to be smarter than this. We really do. And it's alarming to me that when they start a project out by trying to avoid the public process, that speaks volumes, because if they really thought that this was that good of a thing for Delaware, it would be out in the open and they would not be trying to pass it through, behind closed doors. So, that's something that you have to ask in your mind. If it's that good, it should be able to sell itself, right, with the facts.
Yeah. And if I may, Dustin, very quickly, because I think next steps for this project, as you were discussing, is a local planning and zoning commission hearing, and then an ultimate decision by the county council. And the ordinance that was introduced by the county council on the 12th of this month is as bare bones as it could get, and continues to treat this project as though it's a composting site, which it's not. And the current proposal would include 0 additional protections than what already exists for the composting facility. So I want to say that again. The county is proposing to approve this conditional use with 0 additional protections for an industrial gas production site than what they felt was appropriate for an open air composting site. And that is just really problematic from a public safety perspective, as we've been talking about.
And one other thing that has come up is impact on farms in the area. Of course, agriculture is a huge industry in Delaware, which is part of some of the issues that we're dealing with, right? But also a major part of our economy. One that we need to work as a unit to make sure is not damaged or injured, but is acting socially responsibly and sustainably. So Maria, and then Tyler, if you could jump in too, from what we know right now, does it seem like this project could help the agriculture industry in our state, or do you think it could actually hurt some of the local small farms in the area?
So I'm glad you asked that. That is a good question. And I will say that we saw back, I was called into Kent County, probably, I'm going to say around 2000, maybe 14, 15-ish, because they were building these massive facilities, complexes. And I'm talking 20 house proposals that were 600, 650 feet long, next to a 12 poultry house proposal. These were not your small family farmers. These were for a farm to build one poultry house is approximately, the cost is $400,000. Take that, times it by 20, and you tell me what family farmer is building these. What I will tell you is that I have heard, and from some of the contract growers that talk to me, a lot of them talk to me, about what's actually going on. And there have been some of the ones that have the older, smaller houses are losing their contracts unless they upgrade to these, which they're not going to do, because you're talking about farmers that are, probably close to 60, 70 years old, and do not want to go into debt to build. So, they're ended up now without birds, and that's their income stream, that's their money stream. So I don't think that this is something that's going to help our family farmers down here. I'll tell you the trend that I'm seeing within the industry. And I had this discussion with the Sussex County folks, because the same time Kent County was calling me in, I was getting calls from Accomack County, Virginia. I have residents there that have 24 poultry houses next to their ag residential house. In West Virginia right now, I have a community who has an application in for 20 poultry houses. It's Gallus Equity is the applicant. It's not a family farmer. Writing's on the wall where this is going. I don't need to explain it any more than that.
Tyler, you want to add anything?
Yeah, local folks, the contract growers will not receive any money from this. As I understand, Purdue is actually going to pay Bioenergy Development Group to take the waste. I think it's a relatively small amount of money, but they will actually pay them per ton to take this waste off their hands. Don't hold me to that, but that's my understanding from some media coverage of this issue. And on top of that, remember we were talking about the waste streams that come out of this facility, and that liquid digestate is has more potential to harm water quality with nitrogen and phosphorus than waste pre-digestion, because it becomes more soluble and therefore more readily carried by water through groundwater and surface water. The Gum Branch watershed, which feeds into the Nanticoke River, which then feeds into Chesapeake Bay. So the Gum Branch watershed is where this facility would be sited, is already under what's called a total maximum daily load, which is just a fancy lawyery way to say there's a plan in place that requires the state to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus inputs to those local waters. And as Maria has aptly pointed out, we're talking about bringing in waste from the whole region and then having to manage it locally. And so what that means is, to meet those 30% nitrogen reduction goals and those 50% phosphorus reduction goals for the Gum Branch, those reductions have to come from somewhere. And if a new source of pollution is allowed into the local environment, somebody else has to pick up the slack, which pinches, every other user of the area. So that's everything from non-animal agriculture, small scale family farmers, even managing residential lawns and things like that. It's, there's a universe of pollution out there. And when the state is being mandated to reduce on very significant levels that pollution input, somebody has to do that. And so to the extent that this project brings in more nitrogen and more phosphorus to be managed locally, it just makes it more difficult for every user in the area at the end of the day.
Well, where's the accountability, right? Because we're talking about, Tyler, I saw that and I was looking at the impaired, parts when I was going into the water maps. And, going through my mind, I was reading with the TMDL, part of the Chesapeake Water Implementation Plan. where is the accountability? You know, why aren't we saying, okay, no more humongous operations like that until our water is brought down to the level that it should be in the TMDL, right? Why are we even going that route before we're repairing what we're supposed to be repairing now as part of the, you know, water implementation plan? It makes no sense.
Agreed. We're actually a little over the hour. So I want to wrap it up. Tyler and Maria, I know you guys have other events cooking. I'd love for you to share here with our attendees. Anything you have that people can stay tuned in on this.
Absolutely. And Dustin, I want to thank you and the Sierra Club and a lot of the folks, you know, that helped to sign on to a letter, because had there have not been that amount of public pressure from groups, I think that this would have been stamped by now and going through without any public process against the zoning, you know, our zoning code. So stay on top of it. You know, I always think sunshine's, you know, the best disinfectant. So thank you, Dustin. Appreciate all that Sierra Club's done to raise attention.
We're glad to help. Tyler, Food and Water Watch, what do you guys got cooking?
Yeah, so Maria is working with our factory farm organizer, and we have a webinar planned on January 28th to talk more about these issues and really get people more sort of tied in and prepared for this series of hearings that we've been discussing. So it's very likely that the zoning hearings will take place next month in February. The agendas are not out yet, but that is to be expected. And then from there, the various DENREC permits that this facility will require. So great, it looks like you just plugged in that information. So if this is a issue that's important to you or interesting, or you want to learn more, I'd highly encourage you to join that webinar on the 28th, where we'll have some other local activists and experts to join us to talk more about this issue.
Yeah, and I will mention, I believe Gina who has experience now with this kind of stuff, will be on there. Gina Burton, and I believe Carrie Evelyn Harris will be joining us as well for the event. Great.
Well, Tyler, Maria, I can't thank you enough for joining us today, and thank you for your service to Delaware in this line of work. I know you guys are very busy, and Maria, I know you a little bit more so than Tyler, and I know how many things you got your hands in, and really appreciate you taking the time tonight to help educate a little bit, dispel some of the misrepresented data and information that's being pushed out. It's sad to see how our media here in the state of Delaware is covering this project. Hopefully we can have more events like this where we can kind of maybe combat the narrative that's being spread and speak the truth to some of the issues, the very real issues that we've talked about here this evening. Sierra Club certainly looks forward to keeping in touch and working together on this issue. Please, I did put the webinar information in the chat. I also put it for those watching on Facebook, I put it in the comments. Please do RSVP to join that. And please stay tuned on the Sierra Club on our Facebook and our website. As soon as Maria or Tyler gives us information on when the hearings are going to come out, we will most definitely publish that on our website. We'll definitely send an email out to those, particularly those in Sussex County. It's going to be so, and I can't stress this enough, so vitally important that you guys get involved in the planning and zoning, that you testify and that you ask questions and you raise the issues. That is your one shot at talking directly to the people that are proposing this before it goes through. So I just can't stress that enough. If you can't do anything else, come to the planning and zoning meeting and speak out and ask questions, because there's a huge vacuum on education on this issue with the people making the decisions. you know, to think that everybody in positions of power knows everything about everything is just not realistic. It's up to us to educate ourselves and educate them on the issues of importance. And that's county council and state legislators and on up. So please come and ask those questions so that they are forced to be educated on this issue. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate everybody that stayed on for the whole Zoom and the Facebook feed. The Facebook feed will stay on our Facebook under videos, and it will be published tomorrow, well, by Monday at least, on our live stream series landing page at sierraclub.org/Delaware. So if you missed this or if a part of this, or if you want to share this, it will be available online in those two forms. So thank you all very much for joining us. Tyler and Maria, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your night. Thank you, Dustin, Tyler, thank you. And in the end, it's all about justice. We need to have big voices. So we all need to help out, especially when it's a disadvantaged community. That's my heart, and it's all about justice.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.